15.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Krishna. Good morning. Today is January 21st, 2022. And we are going to start with invoking auspiciousness the way Vyasadeva did when he started the recitation and compilation of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So we can do that in call and response. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayana Namaskritya Narantraiva Narottamam Devim Sarasvatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudivayat. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Narayan, and to Narayan Rishi, the supremest human being, and to Mother Sarasvati, the goddess of learning, and unto the author, Srila Vyasadeva. So we are reading from the third canto called, I think, the Status Quo. I'm going to verify that. Status Quo. And we are on chapter 1, question by Vidura, and text 15. We can repeat one word at a time. Yes, and you have it?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So we are going to look at the synonyms, and we are going to say one Sanskrit word at a time. Ka, enam, atra, upaju ava, jimam, dasya, sutam, yat, balina, eva, pusta, tasmin, patipa, parakritya, aste, nirvasyatam, ashu, purat, swasana, kaena matro paiju avajimam, dasya sutam yad varinaiva pushtam, tasmin pratipa parakritya daste, nirvashyatam ashu purat shvasana, ka enamatro pajuhavajimam, dasya sutam yat varinaiva pushtam, tasmin pratipa parakritya aste, nirvasyatam ashu puratshvasana, Ka enamatra pajuhavajimam. Dasya sutam yad balinaiva pushta. Tasmin pratipaparakritiaste. Nivashyatamashु parachvasana. Chant.
Kaenamatro pajuhavajimam.
Kaenamatropajuhavajinam.
Dasya sutam yad balinaiva pushta.
Dasya sutam yad balinaiva pushta.
Tasmin pratipa parakritya aste.
Tasmin pratipaparakritya aste.
Eva sutam ashuparachvasana.
Nirvasyatam ashuparachvadana. Kaenamatropajuhavajinam.
Dasya sutam yad balinaiva pushta.
Dasya sutam yad balinaiva pushta.
Tasmin pratipaparakrita aste.
Tasmin pratipaparakritya aste.
Nirva yatamastu purak vasanaha.
Nirvasyatam ashuparachvasana. Someone online would like to chant the verse?
Kaenamatropajuhavajimam.
Kaenamatropajuhavajimam.
Dasya sutam yad balinaiva pushta.
Dasya sutam yad balinaiva pushta.
Tasmin pratipa parakritya aste.
Tasmin pratipaparakritya aste.
Nirvashyatam ashupurachvasana.
Nirvasyatam ashuparachvasana. Anybody else? Okay, we are going to read the synonyms now. Ka, hu, enam, vis, atra, here, apajuhava, called for, jimam, crooked, dasya, of a kept mistress, sutam, son, yat, whose, balina, by whose of substance, eva, certainly, usta, gone up, tasmin, unto him, patipa, enmity, parakritya, enemy's interest, aste, situated, nirvashyatam, get him out, ashu, immediately, purat, from the palace, prasasana, let him breathe only. Translation. Who asked him to come here? The son of the kept mistress. He is so crooked that he spies in the interest of the enemy against those whose support he has gone up. Toss him out of the palace immediately and leave him with only his breath. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. When getting married, the Kshatriya kings will take on several other useful girls along with the married princess. The girls' attendants of the king were known as dasis or attendant mistresses. By intimate association with the king, the dasis will get sons. Such a son were called dasiputras. They had no claim to a royal position, but they will get maintenance and other facilities just like princes. Vidura was the son of such a Dasi, and he was thus not counted among the Kshatriyas. King Dhritarashtra was very affectionate towards his younger Dasi Putra brother, Vidura, and Vidura was a great friend and philosophical advisor to Dhritarashtra. Duryodhana knew very well that Vidura was a great soul and well-wisher, but unfortunately he used strong words to hurt his innocent uncle. Duryodhana not only attacked Vidura's birth, but also called him an infidel because he seemed to support the cause of Yudhishthir, whom Duryodhana considered his enemy. He desired that Vidura be immediately put out of the palace and deprived of all his possession. If possible, he would have liked to canned and he would have liked him canned until he was left nothing but his breath. It showed that Vidura was a spy of the Pandava because he advised King Dhritarashtra in their favor. Just is a situation of palace life and intricacies of diplomacy that even a thoughtless person like Vidura could be charged with something abominable and punished. Vidura was struck with wonder at such unexpected behavior from his nephew Duryodhana, and before anything actually happened, he decided to leave the palace for good. I'm going to invoke auspiciousness with some more mantras, auspicious mantra to bring the help of so many personalities to make sure that whatever we speak is according to a bona fide line of disciplic succession and of knowledge. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyanajala Shalakaya Chakshun Milityam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Shtafitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Upakadamyam Datati Swapadam Tikam Ondeyam Shiguru Shiguru Papaga Kamala Shiguru Vaishnavam Shah Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sahagana Raganutam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Shah He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Kamshakarpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadada Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prastaya Bhutale, Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta, Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvesesha Shunyavadi Paskyacha Dejatarine Who asked him to come here? The son of a kept mistress is so crooked that he spies in the interest of the enemy against those whose support he has grown up. Yeah. Toss him out of the palace immediately and leaving with only his breath. So what's it's happening here is that there is a very angry Duryodhana speaking to his uncle Vidura. So as we have read before, this is a story. The great sages, they expanded on the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam was given from Krishna to Brahma, and Brahma in turn gave it to his son Narada in just 4 verses. Sometimes it says 6 verses, but like that. And then we have 18,000 verses now in, from 4 to 18,000. What's happened? So what's happened is that the sages, understanding that the people in general will have a difficult time to really understand concepts, philosophical concepts that help us to develop our spiritual life, of expanded on it, and they expand on it through stories. Because as we hear story, we remember, isn't it? We remember, like even Lord Jesus Christ, a lot of what he was doing is parables. He was speaking in parables, and most of his parables were stories. And through the stories, the hope is that the people hearing the stories will understand the content of the story and the import of the story. And by remembering the story, it's easier to remember stories than spiritual concept or philosophical concept. They will be imbued, absorbed with the philosophical concept. And of course, Lord Jesus Christ, Srila Prabhupada, all the teacher in disciplic succession, their goal is one. They only have one aim, and it's all very, they're always canvassing to find a way to support those conditions, so those souls that are not naturally inclined towards God, towards remembering who they are, towards remembering like that the purpose of human life. So their aim is one, and that aim is to find a way, anyway, finding a way to get people to awaken to their real constitutional position. Because our position is to be servant. We are servant. We always serve someone. It's natural for us to serve, isn't it? If we don't serve a boss, we serve, someone we admire, or we serve our nation, we serve our friend, we serve our spouse, we serve our family, we serve our society, maybe by becoming altruism, going into altruism, or maybe become a military man. We always serve, and we serve our senses, we serve our mind, we become slave of our senses, slave of our mind. So we are always serving. So those sages, great sages, they are all serving, and they are allowing us to come to understand why is it our nature to serve, why we cannot get away. In fact, the word dharma means service. It's like, something that cannot be separated from a substance. Like sometimes we say that, for example, what cannot be separated from sugar is that it's sweet. Yes. What cannot be separated from fire is it's hot. Of course, we can do so many things with fire. So what cannot be separated from the living entity is service. We cannot separate ourselves from service. So then the question is that, okay, if it's our nature to serve, what's the object of our service? What's the object of our service? For us to be aligned with our constitutional position. And those sages, they are canvassing constantly to help us understand that the object of our service is our source. Makes sense. It makes sense, like we will serve our source. And as long as we direct our service towards things that have a beginning and an end, and things that are meant to satisfy us, we are going to experience a lot of frustration. I imagine like we all have experienced frustration. So those sages, they are constantly canvassing, wanting us to understand, you're a servant, your dharma, your constitutional position is to serve, and your eternal dharma is bhakti yoga, to serve God, Krishna, in love and devotion. Simple, it's simple. However, 18,000 verses with so many stories. So here we are eating a very interesting story, because as we are reading right now, we are also, discovering some background from the Bhagavad Gita. Many of us, we read the Bhagavad Gita on Monday. We have a woman reading group where we read Bhagavad Gita. And in the Bhagavad Gita, we hear so many things, and we don't necessarily have the context of the Bhagavad Gita. So here we are diving into some of the context, of course, not everything, but some of the context of the Bhagavad Gita, hearing about that family that was engaged on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, because on the battlefield of Kurukshetra was one family, a divided family. And we can see that in many families. I know in Europe there is big families, and often there is big clan. There is clan in same family. In Sicilia or in places like that, they are still big family and they have clan, and so they fight against each other. So in the coup, they're all coups. They all come from King coups, and they're all coups. However, Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana, his son, the king Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana, they decided to call themselves coups. And then the other one, they're called Pandavas. And that's why that's division happened. That's where the division happened. Because Dhritarashtra, he was kind of by default, he became king because he was born blind and he wasn't supposed to be the king. But by default, because his brother, his younger brother who became the king, died, then there was a time of interim. And during that time of interim, he was allowed to be the king, waiting for the heir of the kingdom was Yudhishthira, one of the Pandavas, the older son of King Pandu, to grow up, to be ready to take the kingdom. And when that happened, then Dhritarashtra was like controlled by his son Duryodhana. He kind of refused them their righteous, their right to be ruling the country. And they were really qualified because they were pious king, they were devotees of the Lord, they knew the goal, the purpose of human life. By knowing the purpose of human life, then someone can lead. Otherwise, where do we lead? Where we do lead people? To love me? That's what leading means. Often that's what it is, even in spiritual community. I'm leading you to make sure you love me. I'm leading you to make sure that you do things that I believe in. And then there is a ruler of government, and they are very lost. Like I like to sit down with a ruler of government and ask that question: where are we going? What's the goal here? And I imagine that question alone will be very confusing and bewildering, because it's like it seems that the ruler of the world have been in an hamster wheel, like rolling in a downward spiral without even taking time enough to step back and say, what's the goal here? What's the goal of ruling a country? What's the goal of leading? What's the purpose? What is the welfare for humanity? What's the welfare for a citizen? My sense is that nobody's asking those questions. And then it becomes like, okay, how many television? We can make sure that everybody have a television home or a wash machine or all comfort, and then it becomes like focus on protecting against greedy, rulers, or being a greedy rulers for my aggrandizement, all that. So here we are Duryodhana, and Duryodhana is angry. And Duryodhana is seeing in terms of friends and enemy. You see in terms of friend and enemy. Instead of seeing his uncle is really there to try to put some intelligence in Duryodhana and in his father, Dhritarashtra. He's here to just put some intelligence. Look at what's happening here. You're confused. You're not seeing first that what you're doing is not according to religious principle. What you're doing is acting out of envy and greed. And not only that, you're not seeing that by doing so, you are like condemning your own self. So Vidura is really coming to Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana as a friend, as a well-wisher, really wanted to support them to see their best interests. However, because Duryodhana, his vision is in duality, friends and enemy. He casts away his uncle Vidura and accuses him of spying on an enemy, because that's what he sees. He sees friends and enemies. So if they are not friends, they are enemies. And if Vidura, his uncle, is canvassing or trying to stop the war against enemies, that must mean that he's trying to favor the enemy. And that's not at all where Vidura was coming from. Vidura was coming from wanting to help both Dhritarashtra and his son Duryodhana, seeing their best interest in a long term, and not only in this lifetime, but in the next life. And in reality, we have only 6 enemies. That's all of us. We can see in terms of enemy, this person gratified my senses, and so they are my friend. These people are going against my senses being gratified the way I want my senses and my mind to be gratified, and they become my enemy. And when I have enemies, then I'm going to act with vengeance, like Duryodhana is acting out of vengeance. And really, we have only 6 enemies. What are they? What are our 6 enemies? Our 6 enemies. Well, we have our senses, but our senses are not enemies. Our senses can be our friends. Our mind can be our friend too. But those 6, they are like, so we are starting with Duryodhana. So Duryodhana here is angry. So that's one enemy. Anger is like damaging for spiritual life. Anger that's not in the service of Krishna, because there is righteous anger. Like if I see injustice. And in fact, that's really interesting, because here Vidura is demonstrating that a very principle, because Vidura, when he came to like speaking the truth, and he didn't speak with anger, but he came from a powerful place. When he comes to speaking the truth about the Pandavas and about the injustice, he spoke the truth. But when he was coming from him being assaulted by Duryodhana with anger, he didn't say anything. So when it was time for him to stand for justice, he did stand for justice. And when he was just standing to defend himself, he wasn't interested in that at all. So anger has its place in spiritual life also. And anger, spiritual life, is to take a stand for what's right, to see someone is criticizing a devotee, someone is doing some damage for the spiritual life of others. Then that's a good time to use anger. Here, Duryodhana is using anger out of greed. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's explained that when we contemplate the object of the senses, that we all have our object of the senses. Maybe it's food, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's something we want, like that. So when we contemplate that, when we allow our mind to go to something we don't have and we want, then it says that by contemplating those things we want but we don't have, then we develop lust. So one enemy is lust. Lust is an enemy of our spiritual life. And from lust, then we develop attachment. Then we become really attached. I have to have that. Even so, it's impossible. Let's say my quota for this life is to not have much money or just bare minimum. And I'm constantly thinking, I have to be a millionaire. I have to be a millionaire, and then attachment to that. And then from that anger comes because I'm going to work very hard and I don't get my $1 million. And then I get angry. I really get angry. And then from that anger is anger, like madness, and from madness, delusion. So understanding the enemies of anger, greed, lust, madness, illusion, envy, all those are the real enemy. And we can practice. I know I practice like like when I feel like I have an enemy or someone wants to hurt me or something, I say, oh, I remember who are my enemies really. My enemy are only 6. There is 6 enemies, and that's the only enemy, and there is no other enemies. So to remember, like, okay, what am I contemplating? What am I, if I'm angry, like looking at, if I'm angry, what is it that I'm contemplating? What object of the senses, object of my mind desire I am contemplating that led me to lust, attachment, intense attachment, and then greed, and then madness and anger. And so Duryodhana, we can see in here, he is so greedy. He wants the kingdom. He doesn't deserve the kingdom. It's not for him to have, first because his father wasn't the king, but by entering, but also because he wasn't born as a first heir. Yudhishthira was the firstborn of that dynasty. And so he was the rightful heir of the kingdom. And so Duryodhana, he was furious, and he didn't know how to control his tongue. In Nectar of Instruction, the first verse starts with Vacho Vegan. Vacho Vegan means to control the tongue. So Vacho Vegan, so when we control the tongue, and the tongue had 2 functions, to speak and to test. So the testing is easy to control in the sense, in a society of devotee, we eat prashadam, we are vegetarian, we offer what we cook with love and devotion to Krishna, and then we accept prashadam. However, the other Vacho Vegan is to control the tongue, control our speech. And I know I could really benefit from controlling my tongue more. I know my spiritual life will be a lot more dynamic if I was controlling my tongue to speak about about topic. In fact, controlling the tongue doesn't mean that there is taboo. There is sometimes a misunderstanding, and in many churches and in many places in the world, in the name of spirituality, we are creating taboos that you cannot speak about that. No, controlling the tongue doesn't mean taboos. Controlling the tongue means like whatever we are speaking about, we want it to be beneficial to others and our self-realization. Whatever we speak about, we can speak about the weather in a way that's beneficial. Like, oh yes, like right now it's winter, and the winter and summer season change all the time. Like happiness and distress. One time we are happy, one time we are sad. It's going to rain today, and the rain is going to bring some demigods because it will bring grains and vegetables are going to grow. So whatever it is, we find a way to speak in a way, Vajravidya means to control our urge to speak, and to control the urge to speak, we can be silent, but even better than being silent is to speak about Krishna, to speak about self-realization, to speak about service to Krishna. When we absorb ourselves in speaking about our service, and our service can be so many-fold. We can speak about, what music we are going to put for that process in a seminar. We can focus our mind in our duties. Do your duties. The Bhagavad Gita said we have to perform our duty. So naturally, we are going to speak, like maybe we are a gardener. We are going to speak about flower. We are going to, and as long as we know that this is for Krishna, then that speaking, that use of our tongue is favorable towards devotional service. And that's a way to surrender, to speak in a way that's favorable to devotional service, and to avoid speaking in ways that's not favorable towards devotional service. One of the ways that's not favorable towards devotional service is gossip. And it's so tempting because all society is based on gossip. Like every newspaper is based on speaking about someone in ways that is not supportive of self-realization, in ways that's not conducive for devotional service. Speaking about other people, speaking about things that are mundane in nature, speaking about sense gratification, because that's, by doing so, we kind of support our own self and others to contemplate the object of the senses. So here Duryodhana is really showing us a complete lack of controlling his tongue. He's really insulting, so insulting to Vidura. In a purport, Srila Prabhupada explained, like Vidura, he was born of a maid servant, one of those dasis. And that dasi, in fact, of all the mothers of the brother Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura, was probably the most advanced devotee. If we go back and look at the story and how she was so eager to get a son from Vyasadeva. Why? Because she knew this son is going to be such a great devotee of the Lord. She was eager to get a son from really the literary incarnation of Krishna. She had the eyes to see. This is the most exacting personality. And I have opportunity, because of my position as a dasi in this palace, to get a son. So in fact, of all the three mothers, she was the one that really had the spiritual eyes to see, and definitely not a renegade, like a son of a mistress. Like Duryodhana is using very, very cutting words, very insulting words, because he's really controlled by greed. And greed is one of the most ravaging enemy of spiritual life. Wanted more than what we have. We have our quota. We have our quota of happiness, and we have our quota of distress. We don't have to make effort. In the same way, we don't need to make effort to create distress. They come, the distress come. We don't need to today I'm going to find a way to really suffer. I'm going to find a way to suffer physically. I'm going maybe to do something. Some people do that. And I'm going to find a way to suffer mentally, emotionally. Today, I'm going to make a plan to suffer so much. And maybe I'm going to meet with people and say, let's make a plan to suffer together. No, we don't do that. Isn't it? We don't do that because suffering comes. They come on their own accord. So similarly, happiness come on their own accord. In fact, Prahlad Maharaj, he said, the more we plan for happiness, the more we are going to suffer. And how wise is that for a 5-year-old to understand that the more we plan for happiness, the more we make plans for happiness, the more we suffer, because we are trying to control some things that's not for us to control. In the word of Stephen Covey said, there is a circle of influence and a circle of concern. And Stephen Covey explained that as long as we put our mind in a circle of concern, then our circle of influence is going to shrink. And when our circle of influence shrink, we feel powerless, helpless, miserable, like a victim. And the opposite is true too. If we really put all our energy in the circle of influence, what is it that I can influence? I can influence to get up in the morning. I can influence what I eat. I can influence what I do with my time. Not for happiness, not just because I can influence that with a goal in mind. And my intelligence helped me making discriminate of what is going to fulfill my goal. And in such a way, like the more I invest in my circle of influence, the more the circle of concern shrinks to nothing. It doesn't have to be there. We don't need to concern ourselves for things that we have no control over. I don't have control over the fact that in the next few days it's going to be a really cold, rainy weather here. I don't have control of it. I can fight it. Like, that's not what I want. I want to go to the spring. I want sun. I want so many things. But what it will lead me to is madness, delusion, anger, nothing else. So yes, to really see what we can influence, and through using our influence, then the result is that we are going to feel powerful. We are going to feel connected. We are going to feel like clear. We are going to feel like, yeah, we are in control, because we are in control. Awesome. We have some control. Like yesterday at the kitchen table, we were speaking about, we are pushas. We are not the supreme push. We don't control the rain, and we don't control many things about us, like our happiness and distress in a nectar of instruction. It's clear. No, it's in Ishopanishad. Sri Ishopanishad, like, it's clear. We are our quota. We have what we deserve, and and no more than that. We have our quota of happiness and distress. So there's no point making too much endeavor in that. And that doesn't mean we're helpless. That doesn't mean we don't have any control. We have a lot of control. We have a lot of control to decide, okay, what do I give my life to? What is worth my time? What is worth my energy? What is worth my intellect? What is worth my creativity? Where do I put those gifts that I inherited in this lifetime, in this body, in this field of activity? We all have a different field of activities, and the field of activity include the body, of course, but not only. Sometimes we shrink into something physical, but the field of activity is more than that. It's a body, and it's a subtle body, the mind, the intelligence, the false identification, the false ego. It's the family we were born in, the country we were born in, the kind of ability we have in this lifetime, the kind of shortcoming we have in this lifetime, the kind of all of it. And so that's our vehicle. That's our vehicle all together. And then instead of fighting the vehicle and saying, I have a Muppet, but I want a semi all my life, I'm going to be frustrated because I have a Muppet and I was a semi. I can say, I have a Muppet, and I'm going to go to my destination with it. It will take me maybe a long time, but steadily, patiently, with determination, resolute in my purpose, I'm going to arrive there. It's amazing, like Vidura. We are coming to that story, and Vidura, after that, he left the palace, and Prabhupada said he just on his own accord, he left, like at the end of the purport. I love what Prabhupada said about Vidura. He said he decided to leave the palace for good. He didn't make a drama. He didn't defend himself. He didn't say, well, I need to gather a lie all over the world to see how Duryodhana is wrong and making wrong and me right. He just didn't do any of that. He just said, okay, well, I'm mistreated here, and my purpose in being here is to help, but my help is not welcome. I'm going to help myself. I'm going to move on. I'm going to leave the palace for good. And then he went on a pilgrimage. So I had a point that I wanted to make, and I forgot it about that. So yes, he didn't see enemies and he didn't fight. And so he went on a pilgrimage. And oh yes, I remember. And he didn't have a pet, or he didn't have a samai. He didn't have a car. He had his 2 legs. And maybe he had a bag. I don't imagine he had much, because everything belonged to the cours. So he didn't take anything. He didn't want, because Duryodhana insulted him like, we maintained you, we took care of you. So you should be grateful to us and not tell us the truth. But a real Brahman, like we spoke about Shanya Pandit, when was that? Wednesday, Yogeshwar Prabhu spoke a lot about Shanya Pandit. So a real Brahman is not attached to what he's receiving. There is nothing that can bound a Brahman. And even Shakyamuni Pandit, he was a counselor of a king, and I don't remember the name of the king right now. And in order to stay clean, that he knows that he will just stand by the truth, he didn't accept one cent from the king. He didn't even live in the city of the king to be free to speak the truth. So similarly, Vidura, even so he did live in a palace, and even so he was fed by the cours and he was educated by the cours, he wasn't attached to that. For him, he wasn't there to receive all the prestige. He wasn't there to receive all the money. He wasn't there to receive all the honor that, he was treated like a king. Even so, he wasn't a king, but he was treated like a king. He didn't care about that, but he still stays there because he wanted to help them in self-realization. And when he understood that, they don't want self-realization, obviously, he left everything like he was stool. He left the wealth, he left the prestige, he left everything behind, and he moved on to his pilgrimage, and he went by foot to different places of pilgrimage. And we will see soon how it took time, because by the time he met Uddhava, which we will see soon, like so much have happened, and like so many months and maybe years passed, of Vidura going to his destination, being very clear that my purpose in life is to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram Hare, and serve the highest welfare of humanity. What is the highest welfare of humanity? To awaken, Jiv Jago, to awaken the sleeping soul to their real constitutional position. So Vidura was very clear. That's what I'm going to do. If I cannot do that here in the palace, it's okay. It doesn't change anything for me. I'm going to go and play somewhere else. And playing, meaning in that, like really giving to the world, continue to be clear. His aim is one. Damayanti gave a class on Vyavasaya Vikam Buddhi Ekeha Kurunanda. Ekeha means one. The aim is one, is resolute in his purpose. And the devotee doesn't move from his purpose regardless circumstances, regardless whatever happiness and distress come. It doesn't enjoy happiness. It doesn't enjoy distress. Is really clear. He's clear about the goal of life, and his senses are under control. His mind is under control. And whatever happens, a devotee see an opportunity. And Vidura, we will see how he just saw an opportunity when he heard Duryodhana speaking, insulting him in a very vengeful, like, like a bitter, toxic way, all Vidura saw is an opportunity. So, okay, that's great. I wasn't attached to be in this palace. I'm not attached to be a king. And in fact, maybe it was a burden for him. So, okay, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to just focus on Krishna. So we all can take example from Vidura and know that regardless what's happened in our life, happiness and distress are going to come and go all the time, like summer and winter season, they come and go. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna said to Arjuna, we need to learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Just tolerate them without, and how we do that? By fixing our mind in service. Fixing our mind in service. Like, because our nature is to serve. And when we serve the reservoir of all pleasure, then by serving the reservoir for pleasure, we serve everyone. And naturally, because we are part and parcel of that reservoir of all pleasure, we experience pleasure. Hare Krishna, I'm going to read the verse again, and then we can have the discussion. Ka'ena matropa juha vachimam dasya sutam yad balinaiva pushta tasmin pratipa parakritya haste nivasyatam ashu puhachvasana. Who asked him to come here? The son of a kept mistress is so crooked that he spied in the interest of the enemy against those who support he has grown up. It's a little complicated of syntax for me, that, but I got it. Toss him out of the palace immediately and leave him with only his breast. So you have only his breast, no food, probably no royal clothing, maybe some, some doties, like some bed sheet for him to clothe himself, and that's it. And Vidura said, great, I'm going for good. Krishna, thank you for being here. Any comment, question? Anything that you'd like to know? That you always wanted to ask but never dared to?
Yeah.
You always want to know about Krishna consciousness, but we're afraid to ask.
Everything you wanted to know about Krishna consciousness, but we're afraid to ask. Kim, I see that you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I was trying to get the hand raised, but I couldn't do it. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I one of the things you said in the beginning really, it just struck me a lot, which was about the stories, the parables. And, sometimes I would think, well, why did Jesus, for instance, use these parables? It's almost like we're too dumb to understand. I kind of took it like that sometimes. But then you were saying something that struck me, where you said, but it made it easy for us to remember these spiritual truths, and I didn't really think of it that way. And then I thought, yeah, of all the stories of my youth and now with Krishna consciousness, the stories really are what come back to me. And I think that's this lesson and that lesson. And even like a mundane story that has affected me my whole life would be The Little Prince, and and sorry to bring up a mundane book, but he said he had this one story about Baobabs, so many stories, but one about Baobabs, which was a little weed that started on his planet, and he didn't do anything about it, and eventually it cracked the planet. And I always think about that when I have a problem. Whereas if he just said, oh, the Little Prince had a problem, he didn't get to it at the beginning, he let it grow. If he used words like that, I probably wouldn't have remembered that at all. But because they used the story, I remembered it my whole life, and so many, same with parables and stories from Krishna consciousness. So anyway, I didn't connect that. I always thought, oh, we're dumb. We need stories because we're dumb. But really, it's such a memory thing. It triggers such memories constantly for me, I know. So I just want to mention that.
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate, yeah, like, our dumbness and through story, like, Narada Muni only received 4 verses, and those 4 verses are highly philosophical. And within those 4 verses, there is the entire, content import of all Vedic literature. Like the Bhagavad Gita is the cream of the Veda, Amala Purana, the cream of the Purana, and it contains all the essence of all the Veda. And Narada Muni, he had the essence of all the Veda in 4 verses, or to speak about Lord Brahma. Yeah, so, and because of us, that's more difficult for us to grab on things, and to story of other people, to story of others, then we can remember concepts. And I like your example. I think Saint-Exupéry, he had spirituality in him. Like when he wrote the Little Prince, it's he had self-realization. He has a lot of writing of his gears towards self-realization, God realization. So Saint-Exupéry, who wrote the Little Prince, for you, like that story of the weed that grew and cracked his entire planet, including the rose, including the little rose, then something to remember. Okay, well, don't neglect, when you see a weed, don't neglect that weed. And Srila Rupa Goswami gives an analogy of the weed in a heart and pulling the weed. And yeah, if we see any weed of greed, envy, lust, anger, delusion, madness, any of those weeds, then if we don't pull them out, they are going to destroy our whole field of activity. That our field of activity will reduce to be nothing, like useless, like Sunaka Rishi said, like the lungs that are not used to breathe for Krishna, that are not used to feed oxygen to a body with used for Krishna, is like the bellow of a blacksmith. So if we leave those weeds, then our life become completely destroyed. And because without spirit, our spiritual life get completely destroyed, so our life become completely destroyed. Thank you very much. And so many parables in Christ, and I do believe that people who do grow up with those parables, those stories, and keep them in their mind, they derived a lot of guidance in their day-to-day life and in their advancement in spiritual life. Often, to come back to the Little Prince, and I don't find that mundane. I often, for me, is a part of the Little Prince that I often refer to, mainly in coaching or with other people, is the part of the fox. When he come on earth and he met the fox, and he say, yes, you need to tame the fox. So it's like that taming idea, the idea of taming, and taming our horses, taming our gremlins inside, taming all our enemies. Thank you, Kim. I see the iPhone with the hand raised, but I'm not sure who iPhone it is.
It is I. It is I.
Hey, Daru, Hare Krishna, Daru Prabhu.
Haribo, Haribo. Well, when you were talking here, I hear a feedback. You hear it okay? Okay. Anyhow, when you were talking earlier about the 4 verses or whatever, 8 verses going into 18,000, and it reminded me of a very wonderful thing I'd heard that, like, if, for example, if someone asks someone to, someone who's already who's actually pretty expert, and just says 3 words, make a feast. That's all you got to say. But if someone is not at all a good cook, they have to say, okay, go down to the kitchen. It's this door down. You're going to get these pots, they're there, these vegetables. You got to write a whole book just for them to make a feast. Seriously. And it just is really neat how, those little Vedanta verses, what do they call again? The sutras, those minimal verses that say like a tato brahma jigyasa. I mean, there's so much you contain in that, but you can expand to the 18,000 verses. But it's just like now, and then you got to say, what does the now mean? Now that you're a human being, you've already been through all these other thousands, millions of forms of life. Now, a question about the absolute truth. But you need, well, anyhow, I'm just saying, it's just interesting, these short things and why you need the long ones. It's a good explanation, you know? Anyhow, just throwing that out, pass it on.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I really love your analogy. Yeah, the Vedanta Sutra. Sutra means like so short. But then Vyasa needed to stand on with 18,000 verses for us to understand the Vedanta Sutra. And those who study the Vedanta Sutra, they completely miss the point. So yeah, so you appreciate, like, okay, you can say to Dao Brahma, you can say, okay, Dao, go cook a feast. And that's all you need. You know, you're going to make pakora, you're going to make goranga potatoes, you're going to make kafta balls with tomatoes, you're going to make puris, you're going to make 2 types of rice, and you're going to make chutney and sweet rice, and you're going to make so much. And I have eaten your feast, so I know. And all you need to hear is like, make a feast. And then for other people, you need to say, okay, here's what a feast is. A feast contains 1, 2, 3, 4 different kind of crepes, and then you have the savories and you have the sweets, and here is what Krishna eats. And then after you're done that, not only you need to do that, but you need to give a recipe for each of them. And then within the recipe, you need to explain when you put the ghee and what spice you put. So then you need to write a long, long book for people to start kind of understanding what a feast is and how to make one. I appreciate that. Wonderful. It's a wonderful analogy. Hare Krishna.
Haribo, Haribo.
Anything else? Any other question coming back to Nico?
Thank you so much for a wonderful class. Yeah, I was planning on going to the Springs on Saturday. I didn't know the weather was going to be bad, so thanks for letting me know. But yeah, I always
It's a weather report. It's not the absolute truth.
yeah, that's true.
It's just because we looked at it yesterday with Laura to decide when we go to the spring. We decided yesterday.
So for me, like, it's so easy to see the passing of happiness and distress. Like, it's very simple to see that there's times in my life when I'm experiencing happy and there's times in my life when I'm experiencing distress. My question, or just like the topic that I want to discuss or like hear your take on, is like, as I'm like starting to really dive into Krishna consciousness and practice sadhana recommended by Srila Prabhupada, I'm experiencing a lot of pleasure and fulfillment and satisfaction. So I'm just trying to understand your take on the difference between like happiness and like this satisfaction, this pleasure being connected in this way. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bhakti Nico, for your question. So for you, like, happiness and distress come and go with summer and winter season. Yeah, I get that. And then now, like, you're practicing Krishna consciousness and chant and be happy. So there is a lot of natural happiness in the soul that come out. And so you want to understand what's the difference between the temporary happiness that comes, and then that happiness that you're feeling through the process of bhakti yoga and giving yourself to hearing and chanting. And there is so much satisfaction, fulfillment, and joy there. And okay, is there a difference? And if there is, there is a few things that come to my mind, is that Rama is the reservoir for pleasure. So all pleasure means also the temporary pleasure that come and go. They all come from Rama. There is only one source of pleasure. Now when we seek that pleasure and try to create that pleasure by contact between the object of the senses and our senses, or the object of our mind and our mind, then we create misery for ourselves, because we are seeking pleasure in a place where it is not. And still, because we have a quota of happiness and distress, happiness do come, like, because we have that quota. And when we do practice bhakti yoga, we chant and be happy, then instead of seeking happiness, trying to create happiness when we don't have the power to create happiness is going to come where Krishna decides, okay, or when our karma, like we deserve. And however, when we practice bhakti yoga, we decide I'm going to plug into the reservoir of pleasure consciously. And then the reservoir of pleasure, like as we plug into it, then we experience pleasure. Because as we give pleasure to the senses, Rishikesha is 7 Bhakti Okchati. When we give the pleasure to Rishikesh, the controller of the senses, and because we are parcel of Rishikesh, then our senses are his senses, and we are satisfied and fulfilled that way. So the reservoir of pleasure is one, and however, how we seek our pleasure, and and also, so that's one thing I want to say. And also another thing is that the quality of experience, like if I eat pizza, I'm taking this example, even so I really don't like pizza, but if I eat pizza, then I'm gratifying myself. And then that pleasure at the beginning and an end, and also it includes suffering every time. And so that kind of pleasures that come as gratification is a different pleasures, and kind of even, like sometimes I go in the wood and I feel really fulfilled. But like really, if I look inside, it's like unconditional happiness, like it doesn't have a condition. It's not because I'm in a wood, but I'm more conscious that I'm looking inside. So I'm more conscious, I'm feeling peaceful, I'm feeling serene, I'm feeling satisfied. And I'm just more conscious, and maybe in my life, I don't take the time to look at that. So those fulfillment, they are unconditioned and asked for. There is another word I want to use. They are Haitukia Pratiata, like they have no condition. Causeless. That's what I was looking for, that word. It's causeless. And in coaching many people for many years, hundreds and hundreds of people, like even in the midst of the most challenging situation, people experience causeless happiness, causeless joy. Why? Because it's coming from the reservoir of pleasure, and it's my due somehow. However, I can be conscious that, it's my due. I'm happy, and even so my life is in a chaos, and even so there is so many things that don't work, but somehow if I take the time to I'm satisfied. Strange. Where does that come from? That question is one of the questions that I would say, like at the point and now that we have acquired the human form of life, let's inquire about the absolute truth. That question, like, where is that happiness come from? Because I don't have any money, I have dates, I have people angry with me all around, I'm alone, I just lost my job, but somehow I'm feeling some joy. That's, maybe I'm crazy. I can say, like, where is that joy come from? Where is that coming from? And then, I can retrace it to the reservoir for pleasure and understand, it comes there. It's just, I deserve it somehow, I desire this, it's like part of my karma, I receive it. And then, let me find out, where is that pleasure? Where I come from, and how can I go back to it in a way that's consciously giving myself to serving the absolute truth. Does that respond to your question? Okay.
Thanks for that question response. It's like we are fully encouraged to set our intention to cultivate spiritual happiness for the soul, and that requires the realization, the spiritual intelligence to make the distinction. Like we're not encouraged to make our goal to try to increase material happiness, whether of the gross body or the subtle body. And spiritual happiness, as you described, Malini, that comes Rishikesha Rishikena Sakama Bhakti Chite. Spiritual happiness comes from serving the master of the senses. An analogy Prabhupada often gives is just like our nature is to enjoy, and my obvious, our nature is to enjoy. So then how come 1,000 times we hear we're not the enjoyers? And so as you described, we're secondary enjoyers. So the analogy is just like a mother, so a mother enjoys so much more when she's, let's say, feeding her child. She sees her child has a nice meal. She gets more pleasure from that than by enjoying the food herself. Okay? So it's like, so the mother's nature is not to, no, the mother enjoys, and the mother is a secondary enjoyer by feeding the child. She gets more enjoyment than I'll enjoy for myself. So that's the irony, that when we give up the idea of my material happiness and let me act, think, and talk and make plans in a way for Krishna's happiness and the happiness of Krishna's pure devotee, then ironically, then spiritually, we have ever increasing bliss.
Yeah. And there is a lot of study in psychology and psychiatry and social work about the correlation between, even on a material level, between service and happiness. Like when people serve others, altruism, or through so many like volunteer work or serving others, they will have a tendency, because they are not focused on their own happiness, to be secondary enjoyer in that way than the mother. And that, there is a lot of correlation. If someone is just self-absorbed and doesn't serve, then they are going to be a lot more miserable. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Any other question, comments today? Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Malini.
Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki
Jai.
jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.